education, to include community, to include density, and getting together in groups like Union Tech. They come together more easily, but at least has those three pieces.
Well, if you had to like put a case study together on like the perfect ecosystem on something that either you work on or you haven't worked on, just across the country, and any just like shining examples saying, hey, Tulsa, they're doing a great job building their ecosystem. I'm just curious if any community tech ecosystem really stick out to you in the country. Detroit.
Yeah, I'm a little biased, but no, seriously, the work that we do at Venture Catalyst and the work that we did with, building all these infrastructure, all these huge programs and things like that, we started getting asked all across the country to come and tell people how we did it. Because they were super surprised that, we did it coming from Detroit. So that's part of how Venture Catalyst grew, is that we would be brought in as consultants, and I'd be brought in to, sit with other cities boards and government leaders and to, speak at conferences all over the country to tell them how Detroit did it. And we still have a long way to go, but I know the inner workings of it the most, obviously. And so for me, it's always my shining example that I use in all the work.
Cool. And if you had to look at so let's talk about Detroit a little bit more, the ecosystem here, like what is the ecosystem? I'm not sure if you could say there's like a roadmap for ecosystem, but like how do you see Detroit as an ecosystem evolving over the next couple of years? And then also in addition, like a lot of great things going for Detroit, but like what's like the one biggest area where you're like, all right, we need to improve this lever, or we need to really focus a little bit more attention on this one?
So I think, so what was the first part?
First part was just like, what does the ecosystem look like over the next like 12 to 24 months?
I think we're in this odd space now where people are trying to figure out like how, like, a lot of our power, if you will, was from community. A lot of our power was from energy and from people bringing the resources together alive. We fed off of each other's energy. The next 12 to 24 months, we have to get that back. We have to figure out, how do we connect folks? How do we make them understand where the resources land now? Some orgs didn't make it past the pandemic. Some businesses didn't make it. Startups didn't make it past the pandemic. So we kind of have to reset the map, if you will. I think the other thing that I've been talking about a lot lately in a lot of events and spaces and places is this thought of like commerce, like points of commerce. So when we started out, we were such a huge bet in the world, people going. I always tell the story of like, I remember my first couple calls with like Startup Grind, some of these other groups, and they were like, everybody's here, such and such is here, such and such here, Detroit's here. And they're like, Detroit? Why was Detroit on the call? I remember that. I remember being like, I can hear you. But after a while, then it would become, wait, we gotta wait for Detroit. Like, wait, we hear what they gotta say. And I love that moment of how we transition. We need to continue that. We need to continue being able to tell the story of this ecosystem and other emerging ecosystems just like it. And be able to do a lot better storytelling. I think that's one of those levers that needs to happen. But when we started out, it was a bigger bet and it was volunteer based. Everything coming in was just passion and people believing in the city and wanting to do things for the city. Next stage was, okay, we kind of proved it, more funding, more programs. Now we're starting to get more orgs and things like that. The next stage was, people starting to get funding for programs and companies and all that kind of stuff. Now we're at the stage where I'm calling the commerce stage, where across the board, I think what's needed next is focus on, you have a specific skill set, that's a professional skill set, you should be paid for it. Whether it's value for value or money for value or some combination of the two, we need to keep changing that value of the chain because that's going to make all the other orgs stronger. And that's also going to be more sustainable across the board so that people don't, one org versus another org doesn't take all the weight. And then we learn how to work better together because we're interacting, we're saying, hey, you're doing this skill, it's a professional skill that in the market is worth $1,000 or $5,000 or whatever. So we're going to give you some talent or some labor or something that's worth that same amount. That's how we continue to build at the state until we get more funding, which I think is one of the levers that we all want to work on. So.
Cool. And when you say funding, just out of curiosity, is it more early stage investors, later stage investors, all of the above?
I would say all of the above.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that we talk about a lot is in the earlier stage, we have a lot of programs that are focused on pre-accelerator stage companies like kind of the MVP, most viable, minimal viable product. And we need a little bit more funding at the earlier stage of like, how do we take, we have all these folks who are tech talent folks who work in corporate jobs. There's nothing wrong with that, of course. I've corporate for many years. But if they want the opportunity to come up with an idea, where's their incentive to take their idea and practice it? How do they get to do that? How do folks who don't see themselves as part of the knowledge economy, how do we figure that out? How do we go about saying, okay, hey, you can have this skill set too and change your space or things. There's some funding missing there. There's funding missing, obviously, in that whole spot and space of like accelerator management, all that kind of stuff. More, I'm obviously a big fan of accelerators, but just in general, more funding and OGH funding like that. But then we see after we graduate folks through a lot of these programs, we also see a dearth in that next stage. Because okay, now I've got these companies, I've got them making 6 and 7 figures, they want to hire people, they want to do this thing, and they're all getting to this platform, this plateau, I should say, where they have so much demand coming in, they just don't have enough to buy inventory. They just don't have enough to hire the next person that they need. They just don't have enough. There's a plateau in the middle there. And so there's a need for funding there. And then obviously at the top here, at the top of the state, that later stage funding that really helps people grow and scale, that can prove the thesis of like all this work that we're doing on the steps before.
Cool. No, that's awesome. I think in the news, just because of COVID and everything that's going on, you hear a lot about, oh, San Francisco is potentially done, New York is potentially done. Just curious if your perspective is San Francisco in these coastal cities, are they dead? Are they coming back? Is it going to be too? And then, yeah, let's answer that question.
So I would say coastal cities, I don't think they'll ever be dead. They're too huge, they've got too much invested infrastructure. But I do think they're gonna come back differently than they were before. I think a lot of times we always would tell people like coming to these emerging markets, you have this ability to build businesses in this cost efficient way with cost efficient talent, cost efficient property, whether it's commercial or residential, cost efficient. But it still was a little bit of a risk because a lot of the big tech jobs were on the coasts. I think now with the pandemic, we're in this space and place where people figured out how to hire top tech talent. They can live in Detroit and work at a company that's in San Francisco, or they can live in Wisconsin and work at a company that's in Detroit, vice versa. So I think that shakes it all up. So they're going to have to come more directly with better value to make people want to move out there. Because what's their incentive now if they can get these same jobs by just like just finding a company that's willing to be virtual? Now that everyone's proving that virtual is sustainable, that companies can run, that things can happen when virtual is happening. So I think they're going to come back. I think they're just going to come back different than they were before. I think the other thing too that's really key, people are moving at a different pace than they used to move before. I'm seeing that everywhere. It used to be, even myself included, I remember before they shut down the world, I was on 4 planes that week. I literally was on 4 planes. And I would do that all the time, like 2 and 3 planes a week. I was just running all around, I was having the time of my life, but I was living and sleeping on planes and trains and automobiles because it just had to be in person to get the stuff done. And people aren't doing that. I don't think people will be willing to do that now that they've seen the other side. I think people had a whole bunch of time to think, a whole bunch of time to understand what they want, and a whole bunch of time to understand what does their ecosystem need, what does their company need, what does their city need. There was more thinking time because we slowed down. So I think they're going to come back, but I think they're going to come back in a different way than they've been before. And that's going to trickle down into the stuff that we're seeing in the emerging markets.
Yep. And thinking about emerging markets, one of the things that we see across the country, and again, Topeka, Kansas, and all these other cities, is they're really focusing on like the remote worker. Like, do you think that remote worker, making sure that a city needs to attract remote workers, does that need to be an integral part of this like ecosystem that we're building? Like, does there need to be time and attention to focusing on like, hey, go work for Google, go work for Airbnb, go work wherever you want, but like come work remotely in Detroit? Like, should that be a part of Detroit's strategy and future, like focusing not on the company but on the individual from a remote perspective?
I think so, because I think there's a company aspect too, but I think number one, people see real estate and leases, as we were talking about before, as a risk. And so I think they wonder, that people are going to be a little bit more cautious. And when I say people, I mean corporations and funders are a little bit more cautious for putting in full builds on commercial buildings and 20-year leases and all that kind of stuff, just because we don't know. Like, we honestly just don't know, and it keeps changing day to day, moment to moment. So I do think that if we do focus on like the whole thing that we've been saying all along, is like, here's this community. This community is amazing. It's all supportive, and you can do, here's this tech talent, here's all these things that are positive about Detroit. Come here and build your business. I think that's still in effect, but I think in the next stage it's like, okay, well, so like let people come home to their families and they'll still work for you wherever else, and like let's make it an environment so that people can work out of a bamboo or a tech town or wherever and still have the jobs that they have, all over the country. But we've got to make that environment, you know, there's got to be incentives for that. There's got to be a normalization for that. So when we think about co-working and like small offices and things like that, I think a lot of people, even the companies that are coming back into offices, a lot of them aren't coming back in full time. They're coming back in 3 days a week and 2 days are virtual from now on. And even some companies, I think there's LinkedIn and some couple others are people can permanently now work virtually. So if that's the case, you need to have as many opportunities for folks to kind of work virtually here, because our strength is community. Our strength is the talent that's in this community and building the community around that talent. And then that will draw more funding, and that will draw more ability to build businesses with those resources. But we need to make it an environment where people can feel like, bring my family and raise them here. It will be something that is, it'll be something that works really well, but at the same time, I'm not gonna lose my job or my job opportunity or my business building opportunity. All those things have to be check. And you see like these different places like, hey, come work here for a month and I'll give you $10,000 incentive. I don't necessarily know that we need to do that, but I definitely think we need to make the environment conducive for people to be able to work, no matter what kind of entrepreneur they are.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I was talking to Amanda at Bamboo. Bamboo is a co-working space here in Detroit, and I look, you should go check it out.
Yes.
And then I was having a quick conversation with her. Our company is 100% remote, but we're doing a couple-week retreat at Bamboo. And Amanda was sharing with me that she's like, we're seeing all of these companies just reaching out saying, hey, we want to use Bamboo for a week, 2 weeks, a month. Companies that are from Michigan and companies that have no attachment to Michigan at all coming. So I think what you were talking about, co-working flexibility, is going to be the future, even with travel and a variety of other things.
I agree. I 100% see that, because I think I was liking it back to this. I have family members who worked in banking and were, had in banking or whatever. And for years, when we talk about digitization, they would always say they're never going to allow that to happen because of privacy laws and people's banking accounts. It's never going to happen in banking. But you just saw a year's worth of banking, insurance, venture capital, stock trading, all that stuff. Like you saw a year's worth of people figuring it out because they had to. So that changed the game. Like it changed the game across the board. So now if they can get their whole team together, like you mentioned, like in a Bamboo, in a co-working space, have a retreat, set the strategy for the month or the quarter, and then let everybody work how they work best. Those are going to be the more competitive jobs. I'm going to go to the company that allows me to be my best self and still raise my family how I want and live how I want, but still deliver. I'm going to do that before I go back to, and that's why I left corporate, because I hated the cubicles. Like I like to talk, I like to be out, I like to be out in the world and do things. And I couldn't imagine just going higher up and just fancier and fancier cubicles. I wanted more, and like people, that's what they do. They're like, we're gonna do the glass corner one. I'm like, okay. But I think people now, that's what's going to be the competitive nature. Is like how many days a week that's going to be on the table. Like how many days a week are you required to be in the office? I've always been like that. When I've ran dozens of teams and all that kind of stuff. I've always told my team, I don't need to see your face. I need to see your output. So I don't care how you do it, as long as it's done on time and we hit our marks as a team. And I think jobs that allow that for people are going to be more competitive than jobs that try to go back and try to force people back into the old structure.
Yeah, I think I was just listening to a keynote from the founder of Airbnb, and he was talking about how the power has shifted from, the companies have the power to set the policies. Now it's the people, it's the talent. If you want to attract exactly what you said, the best talent, the talent are setting, hey, these are the benefits package that we're going to have. It's not a ping pong table or a Slurpee machine. That was never culture, but now people are just having this conversation more. And it's interesting. And part of the conversation was like, hey, before if you were offering you need to be in office 5 days a week, and now you're requiring people in office to be 3 days a week, it's really not getting that much flexibility because you still have to have a house or apartment, whatever it is, live somewhere near the office and so on and so forth. And so I think, a lot of companies are still in this very like TBD phase to be able to, what you said, attract the best type of talent.
For sure.
Shifting the conversation, last question about just like ecosystem building is we're talking a lot about like Detroit. There's this Detroit ecosystem, there's this Ann Arbor ecosystem, maybe there's an ecosystem in the suburbs like a little bit. I'm just curious and like, how does that all play together? Do we need to think about these ecosystems as individual? Do we all need to play nicer together? Like, how and should we be uniting as Southeast Michigan versus these individual ecosystems? I'm just curious on how you view all of these kind of players in the same state.
Absolutely. I think the thing that's been kind of a thesis, if you will, as I go into, as I find in the venture world and all those things, I call it third coast, which is like Michigan and Miami, and it's like this focus on emerging markets. And it's this thought of like, we have more in common than we have different. So why not? It's the same as we talk about you're building a community among startups. We're talking about like, okay, you're going to do better if you have somebody right next to you who do the same thing. We need to take that same concept and think about it from the perspective of cities and ecosystems. And to answer your question, we 100% need to be thinking about ourselves as a large ecosystem. It's just basic strategy. Because now you can increase your talent base, you can increase your opportunities, you can increase your funding base, you can increase what can be community. And I think the more that we think of like, I think when I see amazing, emerging markets like Detroit has always been in Ann Arbor. I lived in Ann Arbor for 8 years. I went to Michigan, lived and worked there for a zillion years. But when you see spaces like Baltimore where we're doing the Epitech accelerator, the same things are available that you have to figure out how to build community. That community is now city to city instead of just company to company. We must think about like how do we. It was honestly the premise that we started at the beginning when I was mentioning like my first investment. When we were first doing it, the biggest market that I knew at the time that I knew had a lot of activity was Chicago. So we were trying to build these bridges with Chicago, at the time, and you figure like how can we get our people into Chicago? How can we bring them here? Like those were our initial thoughts of like what it was going to take to build ecosystem here. And I think that us and having Detroit and Ann Arbor, we talk about this all the time. Detroit and Ann Arbor are closer than San Jose and San Francisco. So if we're closer than Silicon Valley and San Francisco, like why are we not taking advantage of that and pushing ourselves forward and like, okay, hey, we want to launch, we want to host this tech crunch thing, or we want to host this thing. Why not do it as a region? And that's one of the things that we've been working on pretty heavily with Michigan House and South by Southwest and all these different initiatives where how do we present ourselves as a collective body full of resources and full of folks rather than as this individual delineated by location. I think the delineation by location is antiquated. I think that's something that's not going to be or put us in a competitive mode. So I 100% think that we need to be working on and thinking of ways always on how do we increase our square footage. That's something we've worked on with like ABC and all these different folks, like not even just those three. Like how do we think of Michigan as a whole? Like what are the collective resources and ways that we can pull everybody together broadly across all the ecosystems that are active, rather than thinking in terms of city lines and county zip codes.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think location is becoming less and less important, and it's like how do we all work together on this like common thread? Let's transition the conversation. We can talk about emerging markets a lot. We could probably talk about that for another hour. Let's talk about venture capital for a second. I actually didn't realize before 20 minutes tonight that I knew you were involved with Techstars, but I didn't realize you were involved with Techstars for over 10 years, which is amazing. So can you give us like just a quick brief background on like one, what is Techstars, and over the last like decade at Techstars, what have you been up to, and then I guess thirdly, what are you up to right now?
Absolutely. So Techstars, I originally got involved. What year was that? I don't know, 2011, something like that. But they have multiple parts. They have the full Techstars is a pension fund. They're a B Corp, and they focus on building economic opportunities and entrepreneurship ecosystem. And they do this by number one, the biggest product is accelerators. There are 40 plus Techstars accelerators globally. And these are full-fledged 3-month accelerators that are investing 6-figure checks into cohorts of anywhere from 10 to 12. We're bringing in mentors, bringing in a vast network of investors. Something like 15,000 investors. I forgot the numbers of the mentors and things like that worldwide. So that's the top product. The next piece is then they have this in a lot of different markets are for Startup Week, but they have the Startup Weeks in multiple cities also globally. And Startup Weeks week-long education, enhancement, deal flow, pitch competitions, all that kind of stuff as is ours. They do that in multiple markets. And then pre-Startup Week, they used to have another program that we rolled off, which is called Startup, now it's called Founders Boost. And it was a pre-accelerator. So instead of like, there's a full accelerator is 12 weeks, full-time has an investment. The pre-accelerator is 6 weeks, part-time in the evening. It's really about mentorship, and it's really to get you ready to either go get funding, accelerate your business, or go get investment, or into getting go get into a full accelerator. So that rolled off. I rolled that off. I was part of the team that rolled that off into Founders Boost. This was standalone, but it used to be a part of Techstars. And then we start off with startup weekends, which are weekend business hackathons, where again, someone who has an idea they might think is a good idea, they bring it over the weekend. They come and try to develop it, and they see what they can do in a weekend, and the person who gets the furthest, wins the prize. And they've had several companies go on from that and get market caps of, I think there's several that have done the quote unquote unicorn status and all that stuff. They started this sort of weekend. And then the very, very baseline of the Techstars program is called Startup Digest. And I used to run that for several years for Detroit and Ann Arbor. Startup Digest is a weekly list of what's going on. DMU Tech would be on it, everybody would, all those folks would be on it, and it would list all the events that are going on in our area. People could put their events, all that kind of stuff. So it's this whole stair-step ecosystem of ways that they're focusing on giving first, that's their mantra, give first. And then they focus on, at the early stage, what do we need to help founders in this area become businesses and help those businesses become full-fledged entities. And so I actually worked with all of those things I just mentioned in multiple markets. And that's how the 10-year span happened, is I started out doing stuff just here in Detroit. I got really good at it, and then I started being invited to multiple cities, other markets, and then I became a trainer. I started training other folks. You see my face, weird like training videos and stuff like that, which I love. But I became enamored because it's all about like coming to these cities and these ecosystems and giving the ecosystem what they need. Not what we think as a venture capital group or what we think is an accelerator group, but what does this ecosystem need? What is missing? And how can Techstars help it? So to me, that's exactly what everything is needed. And they're really big on diversity and equity. And so for me, those are things that led to additional consulting, and we did tours on different cities and open different markets. And this has been a long time partner of ours with Venture Catalyst and a lot of the work that I've done since the beginning.
Well, that's amazing. And more specifically, even like right now, you talked about a little bit earlier, you were touching on Baltimore. So what's going on in Baltimore these days, or virtually, and what are you working on right now?
Absolutely. So I was recently appointed the new managing director of the Techstars Tech Accelerator. So it's again a full-time 3-month accelerator. We recently just closed the applications. If there's someone who thinks that they have a great idea that would fit our pieces, we have a special link. We'll take a few more. But the thesis is 3 parts. Number one, it's led by this group called Upsurge Baltimore. I'm just totally amazed with what they're trying to do, and so that's why I came on board to join the mission, which is they want to set Baltimore as the first Tech city. So we talk about, as you mentioned earlier, like how these cities develop into these innovation and tech powerhouses. They want to set this model for the rest of the country that if you build a city based on equity and equitable access to technology and entrepreneurship opportunities, then that's going to be the lever that makes the city a functioning, competitive city more than anything else. And so there's 3 levers. The first is that we are looking at companies that are led by what we call underestimated founders, so women, people of color, members of the LGBT community, or the differently abled. The second part is we're looking for companies, for founders from any background, where they are building products, where the products are increasing access and equity for society as a whole. So they can be from any background, but they're thinking of the product of breaking down barriers. And then the third is they have a company where diversity is part of the DNA of the company. And so that's not just like, oh, we have this HR, this HR thing going on. It's like you have diversity in your cap table, you have diversity on your board, you have diversity in your leadership, you have diversity in all these different spaces that's proven. And if any of those 3 things fit, or all of those 3 things fit, then we are looking for those folks to become a part of the new Tech accelerator class. And Baltimore, this group called Upsurge Baltimore, is the powerhouse behind that. And I was tapped to lead and be the MD, so I've been super, super excited because I love what they're doing. I love how they want to set the stage for this in Baltimore. And then hopefully it can be a model that can grow to other cities across the country.
Well, no, amazing times by a lot. So I guess just a question for you. There's all these companies that are starting off going through this accelerator. A lot of companies sometimes in a different situation. Do you think from a D&I perspective, if you have to name a big company, a large company, maybe a company you're following that, well, like who is doing a badass job from a D&I perspective, and you would just say like so forward thinking that the companies that go through your accelerator, you can say, hey, here are 1, 2, and 3. You should look at some of the things that they're doing and what is specifically what they're doing. So great.
That's a tough question. I think there's a ton of companies that we work with that are living, walking the walk and talking the talk. One of them is here, like Cricket. I love what Cricket is doing. And I know there's been a lot of criticism on both sides of like, that's what happens when you have a big entity. But I always tell people this, for all the initiatives that people love and think that are amazing, Cricket was my first check on many of them. And they walk the walk and they talk the talk, and they sat at tables with me, went in the neighborhoods with me. That's what I'm looking for. Like when you ask that question, I love what they did. It wasn't just a mouthpiece, it was actual action. And again, all the main things that we've done, they've backed. The other side of that, I know I'll probably get criticized, but it's what I've seen Google do it. Google has jumped into the Founders Fund. I've seen Google come in multiple times with different accelerators, pre-accelerators, funding programs. They've sponsored, similar to Kidpreneur, what I've worked on many years. We did Karate Girls, Google sponsored that, which was focused on young girls. They've always been there trying to think that new. Now they are a huge organization as well, but that comes with problems on making that hit all the marks across all the setup, but it's something that I see. And so when I see that, I see those moments where people are like, okay, I understand what you're doing. Those are things that I admire. Another group that I'm working with is Microsoft. Microsoft was one of Microsoft for Startups, as well as Google for Startups. So Microsoft for Startups was one of our sponsors for the Backstage Capital Accelerator. Microsoft also has their Black and African American Partner Growth Initiative, which is focused on companies that are trying to be managed services or channel partners for Microsoft. And we talk about that all the time of like not having those connection points and how do you become a vendor to Microsoft? How do you become a vetted partner that gets chosen time and time again that can have multiples on X of what you're trying to do? I've been lucky enough to be at the table and in the room when I see these deals go down. I've been on the other side where we actually get the funding, and then I've been on the other side where we actually deploy the funding with these companies side by side. So for me, I look at those moments. It takes a lot to be there. They weren't always at that point. And I think it takes a lot to get to the point where you understand where there's opportunity. I always say where there's opportunity. I never say it's an error, because I think this whole movement of equity and social justice and diversity is really focused on recognizing opportunity and recognizing disparity and trying to figure out how to fix it. And all you can do is develop and evolve and keep trying.
Cool, that's amazing. I was just looking at the clock, which is insanely like 4 minutes.
Oh my God.
So I don't know if we can do this all day, but a few other just quick questions for you. It is when we're talking about like ingredients of the ecosystem, ingredients, what makes us successful VC, how about ingredients for a specific company, right? A lot of people here are thinking about potentially like starting up a company, and I can't even actually guess, you thousands of applications of people going through accelerators and stuff like that. Like, what are the ingredients in your mind that you're like, this could be interesting? The team, market size, idea, execution. What are the things like that you're looking at?
I'm always looking at the team. We always say we bet on the jockey. 100% always the team. Because even in accelerators, even when you give somebody a check from a venture fund, and I've been a scout and a partner in so many of them, the idea pivots. And so, but it's about, does the team have the skill set and the energy to take it through no matter where they pivot it? The other side is like some sort of base understanding of their problem. So what I cringe when I see sometimes, I see people who see a big problem and they want to solve it, but they don't have any like expertise and deep understanding. And expertise doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a degree or a specific title, but you just understand it. You read a lot about it. You're looking on social. You're figuring it out all the time. So when you have that as your setup, you really need to focus on, okay, I know how to solve this problem better than anybody else. And you're confident and that you're willing to ask questions and come to events like this, where if you don't know how to ask the question, you need to learn. That's what I'm looking for. At the end of the day, like when you're in the venture space, you're looking for a few more things. I'm always looking for a moat, or which is what we refer to as like a defensible area around what you come up with, so that somebody else can't just copy you tomorrow. If you don't have that, then it's gotta be something else super special about what you're doing, in order to make it something that's investable and that can scale. And for me, I do a lot of work with nonprofits and with smaller businesses, like the mom and pop shops, as they say, but the bulk of my work is in companies at scale. And for companies at scale, it's about thinking through, not just this market that you can see, but the market that you can't see, the potential for the market, and you have a real solid plan on how you're gonna get there. A lot of my background is advanced strategy and analytics and marketing and things like that. So I need to understand that you're thinking that way. You're thinking not just, hey, I'm gonna take out Google ads. That's not gonna get you clients. It's not gonna get you customers. That's not gonna get you revenue. So you have to have a thought and a process of, okay, these 10 steps are gonna get me to 10x of where I am right now. So all those things, and some people are stronger in some of them, and some people are weaker in others, but the person who has more of those things is gonna get the check.
Well, unfortunately, I only have one more question for you because I want to be respectful to everyone's time,
Yes.
Which is insane because we can talk about VCs, we can talk about ecosystems, we can talk about 25 other things, but this is a more personal question for you. Is I think, I'm trying to think, yeah, I know you've just been in the game helping build the Detroit ecosystem for a really long time, and I think a lot of people look up to you as like a mentor. So my question to you is, I know a lot of people look up to you. Is there anyone that Monica looks up to? So like if you had to pick on an individual, two people, company, it could be really anything, like who could be a family member, who's Monica's mentors these days, a little M&M.
It's funny that you just said that. One of my core mentors are, it sounds cheesy, but it's really true. I just left their house. It's my parents. 'Cause my parents ground you. Your parents will ground you. My parents will be like, that was really nice. Did you sleep? And I'm like, oh, people sleep. Why do you do that? They ground me, and that helps me like put things into perspective. Because if I had my way, like I said, I'd be flying, going all over the place with no thought on any of those things. But they make me think about what's important and prioritize. But there's so many, I can't even begin to name like all the folks who were here before me, that I learned from, who took the time to like explain it to me again, Monica. Because I needed that at the early stages. I think like Hodge is one of the ones that, especially in the Detroit ecosystem, he was one of the ones that was really a big influence on how I think about things. Or in the earlier days, I worked with Angela Benton. She ran Uni Accelerator, and we were doing pop-up accelerators in different cities. I had so much fun, and it just changed my thoughts on everything that I did from there on out. But I've been fortunate enough to have dozens of people just open their doors and let me ask a million questions and not make me feel stupid, which is what I try to do to folks. Not make me feel stupid when I ask the same question over and over again.
Well, yeah, I think the parent answer is so interesting, and I was sharing with you right before we started, we mentioned a little bit months ago, and I think for me that put it in perspective. Now that I guess I'm a parent, which is even like very odd for me to say, just makes me appreciate all the things that my parents have done for me, and so like totally, yeah, we're kind of going through this like introspective moment. It's like about 60 days since we've had this little one, so. No, I get it, and yeah, I would say one, thank you for being here tonight, and just thank you for everything that you're doing, because again, like I said earlier, a lot of people are looking up to you, and we need more Monicas in the city of Detroit. We need more Monicas in the Midwest to help elevate this ecosystem, because I really do believe we're like this really special moment in time, and it's only hitting one, and COVID again has been terrible for a lot of people, but I think this is an ecosystem, we can like a real opportunity to capitalize it and build it way better than it was pre-COVID. So
I 100% agree.
Excited for everything that you're doing, and yeah, just been good hanging out for a little bit.
I know. Thank you guys. I so appreciate your time.
First of all, that was actually really amazing. And I went to check up at the front, and I kind of was able to get us, some questions, some Q&A for Monica and Ryan. So, does anyone have any questions? Yeah. Do you want a mic, or do you want?
I don't need a mic.
All right.
I don't need a mic.
I'm ready.
Hi.
Hey, Mark. I have a question. So there's been a lot of trends, especially for like service business, using software to help them scale, especially during COVID. So I don't know. Do you see a huge opportunity in terms of growth and sustainability, providing a platform for service by service, a niche inside the service by service industry to scale using software?
So say again, Service by service?
I would say around servicing business such as, like contractors, maybe.
Oh, okay.
Bring out houses, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Provide them a platform where you see skill of business, and if so, like, what's some of the, what's some of the key components you think is needed to help get users on a software product like that, or software solution like that?
One thing I would definitely say, we talk about this all the time, but we've had a ton of folks who are in prop tech, real estate tech, construction tech, things like that. And these are professionals who know how to do their job, and they've done it for the same way for X amount of years, and make really good money doing it. So when you come up with really cool platforms that allow them to like automate, workflow and automate, the way that people are gonna engage, the hardest part is the onboarding of the culture. Because they're used to handshakes, they're used to, they're used to a different way the data comes down. So I think the hardest part of that whole thing is like really trying to figure out how do you make the culture something that's accepting of using software to substitute for, what was a more manual process. Some of it is really simple. It's like really showing them like profit potential. Like, hey, I can save you $10 million per year or 200K per month or whatever it is. If you do X, Y, and Z, doesn't make sense to, go do this training, change small things, do digital transformations on small parts of the services that you're doing and then do the whole thing. But it really is all about adoption. It's all about digital adoption on getting the services to shift over, because most of these things are very tricky transactions. A lot of people don't trust that you can put all your credit information in and just get a mortgage out of, like a form or something like that. Or the same thing with like consulting, substituting AI for like how do we go about which framework to use and all that kind of stuff. A lot of people don't trust that. No matter what the profession is, it's really about figuring out what the digital adoption is going to be and how to ease people into it and keep showing them out with it. They're going to value more than they value the ease of having their hands and being able to write every single thing. So, but it's a culture shift. I don't know if that answered your question, but I hope so.
No, it definitely gave you some more to look into, like ease of onboarding and just making sure you understand the process. All right, I have one more question. If that's fine.
You know what? We can do it.
But I talked, we tried to ask this question. I talked to DC like the other day actually, and he was kind of telling me about his experience. He's saying like tons of DC entering, well, not even entering the game now, but more focusing on like what is it, like a beginner stage startup. And I used to look into this space all the time. I just hopped back into about to graduate, but I want to know from your experience, do you see right now as the best time to like get funding as a startup compared to like even like a year before because of COVID? Or like what's the reason why now is a better time to get startup investment than before? And if so, what's some of the tips you can give that would help someone in this room get this?
That's a good question. A couple things. When we were helping, like we have hundreds of companies that have been in our formal cohort programs, and we have thousands of companies that have been attendees to our events. We were really doubling down during the early pandemic and trying to figure out how to help all these folks. And we thought initially that VCs were going to be more bullish, if you will, on early stage companies and more, because we couldn't meet. You're already taking a big risk in earlier stages when there's not a lot of data usually. And we thought they'd be, more bearish on the later stage, but it was actually the opposite, at least at the beginning of the pandemic. What the pandemic did is what I mentioned before, in my opinion, is I think it made people get a chance to really stop and think about their processes and how they meet people and how they evaluate people. Because so much of VC is about relationships and relationships building. And it's difficult to build relationships, at least that was a thought out the gate. It's difficult to build relationships when everybody's behind masks and you're just seeing them over a computer screen. But I think also too, because it's a lot of this, it's a bet, it's a hedge on like what you think is going to make money and what you think is going to scale. And I think what people found later stages of the pandemic was, even though it's a risk, and because initially the early stages were losing out, even though it's a risk, how deep was your relationship before with some guy that you met for 10 minutes in a conference? Were you really building a relationship, or was it just all his flash that he was able to give you while you were in person? Now you have more time. You're able to research more, you're building things based on, you've got to really dig deep into the questions and things like that. To me, I've seen that be the change. The other part of it is, there's been a ton of talk about like the equitization, the equitable access to venture capital funds. And I think people are more cognizant of biases and things like that in this movement as well. But it's that thinking part of the thinking of like, does this founder from Detroit have what it takes, to make it? Or does this founder who doesn't fit the mold of the normal demos, do they have what it takes to make it? Whereas before you were making a snap decision and this mold makes money and this mold I know, so this mold I'm gonna invest in. I think now people like constantly hammering in on the inequity. I think this had some gains. For women, it didn't have as many gains, year over year. Actually, we went down a little bit on venture capital funding. But I think for minority and underestimated founders and from founders from emerging markets, like Detroit, like Indiana, like Ohio, like Baltimore, I think they've seen a renaissance and people being more willing to consider them. The other reason I think is because what we were talking about earlier, people don't only think that talent is on the coast anymore. They know that now. They know that they have to be thoughtful. Like I had VCs tell me that before when I was sitting with my companies. They're like, he's got an amazing idea. I'd love to, whatever, but he's not in San Francisco, so he's not gonna make it. I'm like, you don't know that. Like, if you're so going home about his idea, don't automatically assume he won't make it because he's one of my guys from Detroit. And I think now when they're seeing talent spread out and they're seeing, ecosystems come out, I think people are more willing to think about what does it mean to be talented and connected and what an ecosystem can do, an effective ecosystem in markets that aren't the major markets.
Who else has a question? All right, you are the last person.
One of all, from the DC standpoint, what personality traits the founder or co-founder?
Interests me? The ability to speak. I don't expect founders to know everything, but I expect them to be able to communicate their ideas. For me, especially because I sit on both sides of the table, I'm giving checks and writing checks, but I'm also preparing companies to get checks. And so I need to know that if I back you and I send you in front of a friend or a partner or whatever, that you can sell your idea as well as you sold to me. It's not just because you know me, that you feel confident in yourself and that you know how to communicate. The other side is coachability. From the VC perspective and from the accelerator perspective, both of those are really huge for almost all the things that I'm doing. Because I need to be able to know that we can help you get to the next level. And whether that's it's not just a check, it's not gonna just do it. It's that I'm gonna give you 5 people who are experts in AI and like they're gonna assess your AI app. And then even though you may not agree, do you understand how to pull pertinent information out of their coaching? And so I think that those 2 things are top of mind when I think of personality. And it is likability, and that's why VC has been the space that it's been for so long, is because it's a relationship built business. And you have to like the person because you're gonna be in business with them for 5-10 years plus. And it's not just like, hey, I give you a check and I walk away. You're gonna be on my portfolio and I have to follow up on you for many, many years. So you have to understand how to relate to people and get people to like you. If you don't know how to do that, it's gonna be difficult to get follow-on funding and all the things it needs to scale.
Again, another. For everyone who felt like they didn't get all of the notes that they wanted to, you can find this actually on YouTube. So this has actually been, I made sure that this is live. I made sure that you can go back and probably get some of those goodies that they were able to have in their conversation. Some of the closing remarks that I guess I do have is keep coming back and keep inviting within it when it comes to Detroit New Tech. When it comes to any type of space where you get to network, and especially within this Detroit community, it's so rich with entrepreneurs. It's so rich, not just with entrepreneurs, but people who have certain investments for other companies. Because one thing I believe, and I just think it's true, and I think it's very interesting being a part of an entrepreneurial group for the most part to say this, not everyone's an entrepreneur. It's not it's not like, hey, I can do one too. Yeah, you could, but not everyone's gonna be a LeBron James. Like don't expect, the same outcomes that you would see from a different business. But what everybody does have is a unique set of skills specifically for them. And when 2 or more people gather together with those unique skills, it can create an amazing business. So again, thank you, Ryan and Landau.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Monica. And we do want to make sure we are out of the building by 7:45 because of sanitization reasons. Right? But y'all have a great one and thank you for coming.